This story takes place during my military service. Anyone who's served in the military has probably heard ghost stories, creepy rumors, or stories about soldiers seeing spirits. Most people dismiss them as nothing more than campfire tales. But after what happened to me, I realized that maybe those military ghost stories aren't all made up. Before I get into the story, let me quickly mention something. I've talked before about an elder in my family who had received a spiritual calling. This isn't directly related to today's story, but after I finish, I'll tell you one more short story connected to that. Now, back to the military. I served in the Republic of Korea Navy, and as you know, Navy personnel spend much of their time aboard ships. This happened while I was assigned to a naval vessel. Most people only see the part of a warship that's above the waterline. What many don't realize is that the ship extends far below the surface. Below the visible decks are multiple compartments, ladders, passageways, and machinery spaces stacked all the way down to the very bottom of the hull. You can keep climbing down level after level until you reach the lowest part of the ship. Because of the ship's structure, everyone serving in the Navy has to perform what's called a security patrol. This story happened during one of those patrols. The job is simple in theory. You follow a designated route throughout the ship, checking for anything out of the ordinary. Damage, leaks, broken equipment, or any other unusual signs. That means you also have to inspect areas that almost nobody ever visits. Naturally, those patrols continue through the night. On this particular night, it was around 2 a.m. when I was making my rounds. As I walked through the ship, the layout created a strange sight. Imagine standing in a train or subway car with every door open. You can see straight through each carriage in one long line. It was exactly like that. Compartment after compartment stretched out in front of me, each doorway perfectly aligned, so I could see all the way down the passage through every room ahead. As I walked down the passage, I noticed someone peeking at me from behind the left side of one of the doorways. It was around 2 a.m., and at that hour, no ordinary sailor should have been awake. Other than the personnel on duty, everyone was supposed to be asleep. But there it was. A person was staring directly at me. The way it was looking at me reminded me of something straight out of a horror movie. Only its head was visible, twisted around the edge of the doorway, as if the rest of its body were completely hidden behind the wall. The figure was still too far away for me to make out its face clearly, so I did what any sailor would do. I came to attention, saluted, and called out, "Victory! Good evening, sir. May I ask who you are?" As I continued walking toward it, I expected the person to simply pull their head back behind the doorway. But that's not what happened. Instead of ducking back, the head slowly, silently, glided sideways out of sight, as though it were floating behind the wall. There wasn't a single normal human movement about it. It simply slid away until it disappeared completely. I just stood there thinking, what was that? What did I just see? You'd think that would have been the moment I felt terrified. Strangely though, I wasn't scared at all. The only thought that crossed my mind was, I need to go over there and see what that was. So I walked straight toward the compartment where I'd seen the figure. When I reached the doorway, I planted one foot on each side of the threshold and looked inside. There was no one there. The compartment was completely empty. And yet, for some reason, I could feel it. An icy chill hung in the air, as if something unseen was still lingering in the room. So I searched every possible hiding spot in the compartment. I checked every corner where someone could have concealed themselves. There was nothing. Not a single trace of anyone. If something like that happened to me today, I'd probably panic and yell, "Holy! I just saw a ghost!" and run as fast as I could. But back then, for some reason, I stayed completely calm. I simply thought, nobody's here. I turned to leave. As I took my first step forward, my right foot moved normally, but my left foot wouldn't lift off the floor. It felt exactly like someone had pressed down on my foot with both hands, pinning it in place. No matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't move. With one foot moving forward and the other stuck fast, I completely lost my balance and fell flat to the deck. When I fell, I hit the steel deck. On a naval ship, everything is made of metal. If you fall the wrong way, you can end up with anything from deep cuts to broken bones. There are sharp corners and hard edges everywhere, so it's far more dangerous than people realize. Fortunately, I managed to catch myself with my hands before I slammed into anything serious. I wasn't hurt. I immediately looked behind me and checked the spot where I'd felt something holding my foot down. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Strangely, I still didn't feel afraid. I simply shrugged it off and continued my patrol as if nothing had happened. Eventually, my route took me up to the main deck. Once I was outside, I decided to sneak in a quick cigarette. As I stood there quietly smoking in the darkness, hidden from view, I could only hear the sounds outside. I couldn't see anyone around me. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a voice called out to me. At 2 a.m., clear as day. Pilsung. Victory. The standard Korean military greeting. But like I said, no enlisted sailor is supposed to be awake at 2 a.m., except for the watchstanders. So my first thought was that it had to be an officer, or maybe a senior sailor who happened to be awake. I immediately stepped out, expecting to get chewed out for smoking. But when I looked around, there wasn't a single person there. Even then, I just thought, what the hell? Did I hear it wrong? It was summer at the time. In the summer, you know how a warm breeze gently blows? But this felt different. It was as if the wind passed straight through my chest. I could actually feel it enter my body from one side and leave through the other. I'd seen posts on Instagram and other social media before that said, if a breeze seems to pass through your body, it means a ghost just walked through you. The moment that thought crossed my mind, I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear. So I still had to finish my patrol. I ended up sprinting through the rest of it, not caring whether I woke anyone up or not. Once I finished, I headed back to the watch station. Normally, a petty officer and an enlisted sailor stand watch together. The enlisted sailor patrols the ship, while the petty officer remains at the watch station. As soon as I got back, I told him what had happened. Petty Officer Dolby, I'm serious. Something really strange just happened. I saw someone's head peeking around a doorway. Then it felt like someone grabbed my foot and made me fall. And I know I wasn't supposed to be smoking, but while I was having a cigarette, I heard someone outside clearly say, Pilsung. Victory. I'm honestly freaked out. After hearing that, one of the petty officers standing watch with me told me a ghost story. Earlier I mentioned that you can go all the way down to the lowest deck of the ship. At the very bottom level, there's a storage room where they keep things like paint and other maintenance supplies. He told me that almost no one ever went down there. During my entire time in the Navy, I could count on one hand the number of times I actually saw someone in that area. Then he started telling me about a senior sailor who had served on the ship years before us. That senior had lost both of his parents, so he didn't really have anywhere to go during holidays or leave. Because of that, he often volunteered for duty and spent more time on the ship than anyone else. He had a younger sibling to take care of, but because he had to enlist in the Navy, he couldn't stay by his side. According to the petty officer, this senior sailor was an outstanding serviceman. Everyone praised him, calling him an ace because he excelled at everything he did. However, after one particular incident, he somehow earned the resentment of another senior sailor. As many people know, military life back then could be extremely harsh. Physical abuse and hazing were still common, and the Navy had its own unique forms of mistreatment. They would force people to lie down without letting them sleep, along with many other abusive practices. Even after enduring all of that, he would simply smile and say, I'll do better. I'll work harder. That was the kind of person he was, someone everyone considered an exceptional sailor. Then one day, after the ship completed a deployment and returned to port, the crew began the usual personnel count during disembarkation. During the head count after the ship returned to port, they realized that one sailor was missing. Everyone thought it was strange. That's odd. He's always where he's supposed to be. He's one of our best sailors. Where could he have gone? If even one crew member is unaccounted for, the ship can't simply continue normal operations. Docking procedures are delayed because every sailor must be accounted for, and there are numerous checks and responsibilities that depend on a complete head count. So the entire crew began searching the ship. They searched everywhere, but there was no sign of him. Eventually, one sailor opened the hatch leading down to the paint storage compartment. To reach it, you had to open the hatch and descend a flight of stairs. When they went down, they found the missing sailor there. He had made the tragic decision to take his own life. The petty officer told me that what made the incident even more disturbing was what they found. When someone dies by hanging, the body is normally suspended from the rope. But in this case, although the body was hanging there, his head was missing. Whenever a death occurs in the military, the scene cannot be disturbed immediately. Military investigators have to arrive first, examine the site, and complete their investigation before anything can be moved. That meant the ship first had to dock before the investigators could come aboard. But during docking, A naval ship rocks violently. Tugboats pull it into position. Other ships help guide it, and the entire vessel sways from side to side. Whether it disappeared during that process or for some other reason, no one knew. The investigators searched the entire scene over and over, but they were never able to find the sailor's head. In the end, the investigation was concluded without ever recovering it. After that incident, the compartment directly above the paint storage room, the one located in a straight line above where the body had been found, was the very same compartment where I later saw that head peeking around the doorway. So after hearing that story, I asked him, "Where exactly did you see that ghost?" I replied, "In compartment 8. He immediately looked at me and said, "Compartment 8? Isn't that directly above the paint storage room?" "Yes, sir. It's right above it. Do you know something about that place?" That's when he told me this story. The truth is, I heard countless stories during my time in the Navy about people seeing just a head. It wasn't just a rumor either. One of my juniors later told me that he had seen it himself. His experience was a little different from mine, but he also claimed he had seen a head. That became one of the well-known ghost stories on the ship. There was another famous story as well. The ship had many empty compartments where people normally never went. One day, a senior sailor decided to sneak into one of those empty compartments to take a nap. Sleeping during working hours was obviously forbidden, but since he was close to discharge, he figured he could get away with it and slipped inside to rest. As he lay there sleeping, he suddenly heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, thud, thud, thud. The shoes worn aboard Navy ships are called deck shoes. They're specially designed for use on a ship. The sound they make is very different from the combat boots worn by soldiers in the Army or Marines. You can tell the difference immediately. When someone walks in Navy deck shoes, the footsteps are fairly quiet, more of a soft tap, tap, because the soles are designed to absorb noise. Combat boots, on the other hand, make a much heavier sound. Creak, thud, creak, thud. The soles grip the metal deck, producing a distinct squeaking and stomping noise. Hearing that sound, the senior sailor woke up. He had been sleeping facing the corridor on his left. The moment he opened his eyes and tried to move, he realized he couldn't. "Why can't I move?" Sleep paralysis. But the footsteps kept getting closer. Creak, thud, creak, thud, creak, thud, creak, thud. They grew louder and louder until they stopped right in front of him. When he looked, all he could see, directly in front of his face, was a pair of tan military combat boots, the kind worn by the Marines. Then the footsteps stopped. Creak, creak. The figure came to a halt directly in front of him. He could see the feet shifting slightly, as if someone had planted both boots firmly on the floor. Then, something suddenly dropped from above. A head. It fell into his field of view. Terrified, he squeezed his eyes shut and stayed completely still until he eventually lost consciousness and fell asleep. When he finally woke up, thankfully, there was nothing there. Later, he started asking around about what had happened. Eventually, the story reached the ship's command master chief, the most senior enlisted sailor aboard, someone who had served on that ship for many years and knew its history better than anyone else. According to him, incidents like that had been reported before. Back then, physical abuse and hazing in the Marine Corps were far more common than they are today. Our ship was designed to transport Marines. He told us that years earlier, one Marine who had endured severe hazing aboard the ship had eventually made the tragic decision to take his own life. After that incident, stories about strange occurrences in that compartment began to spread among the crew. And that was the explanation I kept hearing throughout my time in the Navy.